Think of some of the most critically acclaimed or successful films of all time. What movies come to mind? Perhaps Psycho, Silence of the Lambs, The Empire Strikes Back, Infinity War, Black Panther, or The Dark Knight also come to mind. Or perhaps other films, such as 10 Cloverfield Lane or The Terminator. While each of these films were successful for different reasons, they all share something in common. Each of these films is famous for its villain, with Hannibal Lecter, Darth Vader, the Joker, and Thanos. This is a red carpet of Hollywood villainy. Each of these films is defined by its main villain. To an extreme, Infinity War is more a Thanos movie than an Avengers film. Films, however, do not have to follow the strategy that these have used. Films can experiment, take chances, and make changes. One of the most interesting is to remove the character villain from the story. By simply changing the main antagonistic force of a film away from a character, it can assist in creating a more interesting character dynamic, assist in conveying a message or tone, or even become a defining factor of a film. Let's first look at a more general example of a film that does not contain a character villain, one where this is used for a variety of reasons. This movie is the 1999 film October Sky. October Sky tells the story of Homer Hickam, a high school kid who lives in the small mining town of Colwood, West Virginia. After seeing the Soviet Sputnik probe fly over, he becomes obsessed with rocketry, building and launching them in the woods around his town. The main conflict of the story is between Homer and his father, the manager of the coal mine. Homer's father wants him to follow in his footsteps, working at the mine, which is what is expected of anyone who doesn't get a college football scholarship. As the plot progresses, the audience is led to believe that it is Homer's father who is the main antagonist of the film. He wants Homer to work at the mine, an idea that Homer vehemently opposes, and he dislikes the fact that Homer is so obsessed with rocketry. This leads to the relationship becoming quite strained as the film progresses, culminating when Homer and his friends are arrested, being blamed for a forest fire supposedly caused by one of their stray rockets. At this point, the audience can sense that their relationship has reached its lowest point. Homer's father is disappointed and ashamed of him, and Homer himself has abandoned rocketry. Then the film throws a twist at the viewer. Homer's father is seriously injured in an accident at the mine. It is here that the film reveals that the coal mine is the true antagonist of the film. This makes sense, as the film always paints the mine and the surrounding areas in a dark tone, and it is led to most of the problems that Homer has encountered with his father, being the main driving factor for his father's actions. This also allows for a more interesting character dynamic between Homer and his father. Before this, we think of Homer's father as an obstacle to overcome. Once we see that he is in fact just another person whose love for his profession has blinded him to the dangers it possesses, and cannot fathom that his son would not want to follow in his footsteps, he turns into a character that we root for, that we want to see him realize the dangers of the mine, except that Homer does not want to work in the mine, and for him to appreciate what Homer is doing in rocketry. October Sky uses its more unconventional villain to not only allow the viewer to sympathize more with Homer, but to create an extremely sympathetic character in his father. This all creates a more believable and realistic journey for the characters to take. Now let's look at a more modern film that takes the same unconventional villain approach. In Christopher Nolan's latest feature film, Dunkirk, the film tells the story of the famous military disaster where the entire British army was trapped in the town of Dunkirk by the advancing German army. It focuses on three key aspects of the evacuation: the view of the soldiers trapped on the beach, the story of the civilians who crossed the channel to rescue them, and the pilots who fought the Luftwaffe, each story taking place over the course of 1 week, 1 day, and an hour. The film thrives on the immense tension that permeates it. It accomplishes this not only by the incredible editing and score, but also through its non-character villain. Dunkirk, as opposed to many other war films, barely shows the opposing German soldiers. While their planes are seen constantly throughout the film, German soldiers only appear in one of the very last scenes. Even there, they are kept out of focus and obscured. This paints a clear picture to the audience, the view of the British. The Germans are seen as this unstoppable force that accomplished what hadn't been possible in World War I in just a few short days. These were not mere men to the soldiers stranded on the beach. They were the perfect fighting machine, a force that would probably be marching down on their homes in a few short months. As with October Sky, it paints the Germans as an invincible opponent, but instead of using this to make the situation of the British a more realistic one, it uses it to ramp up tension, leaving no room for any sympathy with the enemy. If the audience were allowed to know that the opposing Germans were also humans, then it would significantly alter the way they feel about the British. The film does not want any other viewpoint other than its own established. Doing so would relieve the film of its amazing and incredible tension and suspense. A third way that films can use non-character villains is in a way that has created its own sort of genre. Films such as Robinson Crusoe and The Martian, as I call them, castaway genre. As we see in The Martian, these films usually see a sole individual stranded far from civilization and with little hope of rescue, and forced to survive by their own wits. The non-character villain here is most apparent, as the environment or the world is the villain. These films benefit from having the villain as this unstoppable force. However, these films use their non-character villains in a slight different way than October Sky or Dunkirk, where in October Sky, the main goal is to have the audience relate and find a more realistic relationship between the characters of the film, and in Dunkirk, where the audience is motivated to sympathize with the English to increase the tension of the film. Castaway films use their non-character villain to focus solely on their protagonist. The protagonist is more often than not the character taking up most of the film's runtime. This sole focus forces and allows for films to give far greater depth and development to the protagonist. They can only count on the villain to create situations for the protagonist to react to. The protagonist is the main driving force. They must be an interesting and compelling character to the audience. As in The Martian, Mark Watney is the centerpiece of the film. It is through him that we experience the majority of the film. He has to be a compelling and interesting character, or else the film will fail. These movies can have drawbacks though. A writer or film director cannot count on the banter and dialogue between a character and a villain to create interesting scenarios. What can we take from these films? Firstly, that a film doesn't have to rely on a classic villain. Secondly, that a plot does not have to be driven by the dynamic and struggles between two characters. We've seen that having a non-character villain can actually improve a film in ways that a normal antagonist cannot, be it creating a more realistic character relationship in October Sky, or allowing the audience to more closely sympathize with the characters and feel their extreme tension as in Dunkirk. It can even harbor its own genre, with films such as The Martian, where the lack of a character villain forces the protagonist to become a much more complex and interesting character. All of these benefits can be achieved by leaving a character villain out of a film. However, this is not to say that having a non-character villain is an instant ticket to success. These practices can fail just as often as normal villains can, and should be taken with care and precaution to see the benefits that they can give.